Hey folks, Andy here with Guitar Interactive Magazine. Right, we're going to take a look at TR5, T-RackS 5 from IK Multimedia. Now T-RackS is a set of mixing and mastering software tools. It's been around for quite some years now in one form or another, and was actually one of the first pieces of software that I ever bought when I first got into mixing. So I've grown with it over sort of various releases through the years. Now in the early days it was aimed pretty much at the sort of project studio mastering jobs, and it contained EQ, it contained Clipper, as I recall, it contained some dynamics processing, and along the way it's had various modules added to it. So it's picked up hardware emulation of things like Pultecs and Fairchilds and LA2As and 1176s and so on. And it's also picked up what I tend to think of as being the kind of tech modules, things like the DSR, quad imaging and that sort of thing. So as it sits today, it's available in a range of different ways that you can get into it, going through from simply picking up the free sort of rack unit and then buying in individual modules from the IK Multimedia custom shop, through to the Max version, so the TR5 Max, which contains, I think it's 38 different processors, which is pretty much the whole collection as it stands today. So let's have a look online, see what it looks like, and have a sort of look at what we can do with it. Right, we can use T-RackS either standalone or as a plugin in a DAW. When we look at the standalone version, this is what it looks like. It's got a few main areas to the screen. Obviously, dominating the whole thing is the display of whatever particular module we are looking at the moment. We can assemble strings of processors in series and parallel as we see fit. We can put 16 processors in there plus the master match, which I will mention again in a moment. On the left hand side down here we've got a clip list, and that is where we have our set of tracks that we are going to work on in this project. And if we just click on this button, we get the window where we can actually arrange these things into a session. We can move these about to gap them. We can add fade in, fade out. It's a bit of sort of fairly basic editing, but nevertheless, you can assemble your whole session, can add information, various tag information, and then export them and get a fully sequenced album out at the end of it. When it comes to making changes to actually doing things with this software, we get the option that we can pick out various presets either on a global or a per module level. So if we wanted to pick something out, and as you can see, each one of those global presets will pull in any modules and settings that it needs. Alternatively, we can select an individual module. If I just pick another memory slot here that's not populated, and let's say I wanted to have an EQ81 in there, I can click on the little bars below that, which give me the module presets, and then go through and sometimes it's useful to just sort of step through and see what you actually fancy. And of course, you can always go in and just twiddle and adjust the knobs as you like. So here upon the right hand side, we've got metering for dynamic range and loudness. We also have kind of real-time metering, stereo image, phase coherence, the sort of moving needle metering for peak and average levels displayed both by left, right and mid-side spectral displays, but which will activate or deactivate ARC, which is a separate product from IK Multimedia, which will run directly out of the T-RackS standalone. Just mention another button, very, very useful at the top, is the equal button, and what that will do is let us hear what we're doing without volume changes. It's aimed to keep the volume the same as unprocessed. So if I take that off, then I'm hearing things louder, and our tendency is that we will tend to hear louder is better. So in this case, I can hear things on a level playing field and judge what my processing is doing as against just how much louder it's all getting. So when we look at this within the DAW, so this is Cubase, the actual suite looks fairly similar. You don't get the section with the waveform in. You don't need it because obviously you can see that in your DAW itself. You don't get the section where you can assemble your tracks for your whole session and do the gapping and the fading, because again, that's something that you would then do in your editor or your DAW. But what we do get, same sort of thing, is the control panel for the plugin that we're dealing with at the moment, the list of different plugins that we can drop in to build up, change just as we did earlier, and the loudness metering. I can't figure out how to turn on the full metering package within the actual TR5 suite. So what I've ended up doing there is just opening up a separate meter plugin. Something I'll just mention, which I think is really neat, is this. The VST3 standard allows for plugin interfaces to be resized, and it is so useful to be able to just size things as you want them to be. So just the same collection as you would expect. We have this type of hardware emulation module, which is the 1176, and this one, which is the LA2A type, were amongst the earliest of the sort of hardware modules that T-RackS brought out. And I have to say that to this date, they're still amongst my favorite emulations of those particular units. We also have our Neve style processors, API style processors, the good old favorite Pultec, and somewhere down here, yeah, we've got a Fairchild emulator tucked in there, a couple of different versions of channels of SSL. One of the older units in here is the Optocomp, which is a really nice gentle optical compressor, not based on any particular unit as far as I know, but still very nice in its own right. Now, the other type of unit that we've got is what I tend to think of as being the kind of technical type of unit, and that would include things like the Quadcomp, the quad image, so sort of stereo widener, narrower by frequency band. There's a nice DS tucked in there. There's a quad limiter, things like the stealth limiter. Again, just a clean and transparent limiting plugin. Includes dithering, useful stuff like unity gain monitoring, and different modes to suit different types of material. This is one of the things that I think actually crops up with something like T-RackS. When it's actually been around for a while, you will find that you get things like the stealth limiter coming out. Before the stealth limiter, I used to use this one an awful lot, which was the brick wall limiter. And I think, in honesty, I've probably not even fired that up in anger since the stealth limiter appeared on the scene. So you do get this little bit of sort of obsolescence creeping in there. You have got another one, which I'll just mention, is the linear phase EQ, which was my go-to linear phase EQ. You can see the display here. We've got this this tendency towards using knobs and dials, and when we've got the graphic display, which we can drag and drop about, and because we can resize, that actually becomes, you know, really quite easy to do. But on the original versions, this was a little bit pokey, a little bit difficult to get into. And there we've got 6 bands of EQ available. In the new Equal plugin, we've got up to 10 bands that we can drag and drop, and we can cue with our mouse and things like this. We can have them as linear phase if we want to, but also we've got the ability to switch in different types. The fact that we've got sort of SSL and even API type curves that we can emulate with this interface means that some of those things like the API modules and some of those Neve modules, although they are nice to use in their own right because they get you into the mindset with the frequencies that are available and so on. You can, in theory, do all of that stuff from this one plugin. And look, they've even, if you like, emulated the classic old T-RackS EQ from way back in the day. Got a few interesting little bits in here, like the microphone room, which is intended to take an input as though it was from one microphone style and change it into something else. Now, trust me, you cannot take an SM57, you know, $100 mic, and make it sound like you've got a several $1,000 condenser mic sitting there. It really doesn't do that, but it is actually very useful for just giving a nice sort of slightly different flavor on something. And it's never going to be as sophisticated as something like the virtual microphone system from Slate or any of those things where you've got dedicated hardware and software that runs together. But you know, it does a decent job. And sometimes when you just want a bit of a different sound on something, you can actually do something quite useful with that. Saturator X. Got a couple of taped up distortions. We've got some sort of mastering clipping, I'm guessing here. AB and A class tube amp emulations, solid state push pull and class A, and then some different transformer options. And we can gain it up, and so we can push into the distortion and then adjust the level coming out of it. We can link or unlink those depending on what we want to do. Now, whilst we're in this one, I will just quickly make the point that since as far back as I can remember, T-RackS has included sort of both left, right, and mid-side processing. Is quite ahead of the game in its own right, which is a very useful thing to be able to do. What it doesn't do is it doesn't give us mix controls. Now, a lot of these compressors wouldn't have had mix controls in the real versions of them, but it's still quite nice to be able to do it just to get a bit of that parallel processing going on within the box. Can't do that here, and I think it's a bit of a shame that that's missed out. So now let's have a look at some of the brand new modules in TR5. This is one of the flagship processors. Now, given that the whole of T-RackS was originally set up to be, if you like, a mastering sort of solution, and what they've actually done here is put a whole bunch of mastering processing into one particular plugin. So if I just sort of give us a bit of noise in the background. And what one does for us, a push controls the compressor settings, volume makes things louder, a little bit of transient shaping, and it'll give us just a little bit of harmonic enhancement. We can fatten up the bass, we can do some stereo width adjustment, we can affect sort of upper and mid-frequency sort of bands here, and we can do it all in one plugin. If you're a mastering purist, you may actually sort of look down your nose a little bit at what this is all about, but in actual fact, if you've got a bus or you've just got a quick job that you want to do and you just want to get a little bit of pseudo mastering done, I think this is a really useful plugin. We've got the Equal EQ, which we've just had a look at. There we go. The Dynamu compressor. Now, this is a compressor which is based on the Manley Varimu, I do believe. I've actually found that I've started using this quite a bit on my output buses. It gives a sort of very nice, almost sort of hi-fi finished sort of effect on it. You can get a little bit of volume boost out of it, but it's definitely got that bit of a sense of a finished record sound about it. So that's a very nice one. And the other thing which comes in with all of the paid options is this thing, Master Match. And this is, it's a matching EQ, but it does a little bit more than that, because as well as matching an EQ curve, it also matches dynamics levels. So we load in a reference track and we can have a number of different ones. I've just loaded in one, and I went straight to Metallica's Death Magnetic because everybody loves the sound of that so much for mastering. So I have loaded up Cyanide there. You can see the waveform. So if I learn my preference, which it's taking out from that track, and if I do a learn source, so you see there, I've got my reference, I've got my own curve, and if I just play there, hit the match button, and I can then say push it all the way, which is going to sound awful. but with a little bit of a judicious adjustment in there. It can certainly help to guide what I'm doing towards the sound of what I want it to be. There is also the option to just choose, instead of choosing a reference that you've added yourself, to actually go for a default curve and to adjust to that. Now, we always get one loaded up, although if we don't want that, we can get rid of it. But master match always sits at the end. And I was a little bit kind of concerned about this because I've got my limiter, I've got my level boosts going on with this, I've got my dithering in place, and I've got my brick walling. That needs to be the last step in the mastering process. Master match comes after that. So I asked the question, and what I've been told is that master match has a limiter built into it, so you don't have to worry about introducing overs in master match itself. If you are in the standalone version of T-RackS 5, then when you do your exporting, you can turn on dither from there, so you wouldn't need to use the dithering option in your limiter. But if you're using something like Cubase, where you actually have to put a dither plugin in place, then what you would need to do would be to add your dither module or your limiter after the event. I have to say, I do think it'd be quite nice if we could simply put that after master match. So now, the other thing that does illustrate is the fact that you can insert any of these plugins individually. So if you just want one particular thing, you don't have to load up the whole rack. And it also just brings the one other little thing which is worth pointing out, is that VST3s quite happily support side chaining. None of the compressors in T-RackS 5 has side chaining capability. I suspect that the way that this works is because originally T-RackS was seen as being a mastering solution, and of course you don't sidechain when you're mastering because it goes across your tube bus when that's all you've got. But along with the mix control, which I would also like to see, I think that would be something quite nice to add in there. So yeah, I like T-RackS, I like TR5. I think it's a worthwhile update to previous releases, and I've used the software for so long that some of those modules that have been around a while are just ingrained in almost everything that I do, and are my sort of firm favourites for processors of their type to go to. And yes, of course, we can do most of what we really need to do in mixing and mastering, even just using a bog standard EQ compressor limiter kind of set. But sometimes it's nice to have a range of different flavours, something that like a spice that you can sprinkle over just to kind of push the boundaries back and get a little bit of mojo, a little bit of vibe going. And I think that's one of the things that T-RackS has always been about. Okay, and to pick a Guitar Interactive magazine and T-RackS 5 from IK Multimedia. Take care, see you next time out.